Welcome to the Launch Capsule. With your host, James DuBos. Buckle up because your launch capsule begins now.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hello there, I'm Jim DuBos, and welcome to this episode of the Launch Capsule. So today we're going to focus on a framework in preparation for due diligence. In the previous episode, I talked a little bit about the letter of intent process. And as I mentioned in that episode, I've created an overall program helping entrepreneurs prepare for the due diligence process. When you're doing high 7-figure and 8-figure type transactions, it will be the most onerous process overall in the journey of exiting your business. And so here I've created a framework to help you start to wrap your head around, if you will, what does due diligence mean? And so in the first section, I would talk specifically about financial due diligence. So one component will obviously be the financial statements. There'll be a comprehensive examination of the historical and your current financial records. That's why I mentioned the need for audited financial records within the organization. And they're really just confirming here the accuracy, trends, looking at compliance, and ultimately validating the valuation foundation that was used in the overall LOI. They're also going to look at revenue and cost structure, look at the breakdown of income streams, any expense profiles, understanding the revenue composition, stability, growth potential, these types of elements. And then the third component of financial due diligence is simply going to be the profitability and liabilities component. This is multidimensional, looking at profit generation, examining some EBITDA performance, margin trends, and ultimately inventory and financial obligations within the business itself. At a high level, that's the three sections within financial due diligence. The next is legal component, right? This legal assessment. What we're doing here is they're looking at your corporate structure. They're going to look at any material contracts, intellectual property, if you've presented those elements, employment-related matters, employee contracts, non-compete agreements. Are there any legal proceedings that might be outstanding? They'll also evaluate regulatory compliance to understand rights, obligations, any potential liabilities. And they're also looking for gaps, right? They understand that not everyone's perfect. There are going to be gaps in compliance. And so they want to identify those through this due diligence moment. The next area that I'll say will be evaluated is a commercial evaluation. So the market environment, the customer relationships, drilling into the product and service offerings associated with the business, sales strategies, competitive positioning, growth opportunities. All of those things are going to get evaluated within a commercial evaluation inside of the business. What I'll categorize the next section is really operational and quality of earnings. And so what they're going to do here is they're going to look at a systematic review of any core operational workflows, procedures, what are the performance metrics you use to understand the effectiveness of the business, the quality of the management. They'll also look at supply chain, procurement, manufacturing, inventory management, distribution systems. They'll also look at your technology stack, your tech stack, the infrastructure, the applications, the security components around IT within the business itself. The third aspect of operational will be your facilities and your human resources. Just looking at your physical locations, making sure you're compliant with all, I'll say, regulatory elements, the equipment. They'll look at your workforce capabilities, the organizational structure, the talent management, HR processes within the business itself. And then lastly is the quality of earnings component, which could also be considered a component of your financial due diligence. It's looking at the financial performance of the business to understand sustainability and predictability of earnings my own experience, and I'm actually creating a separate episode just on the Q of E process because it tends to be very onerous as a component of the already onerous due diligence process. And I want to dig a little deeper into this moment to prepare you and your teams to begin thinking about what does this Q of E really mean to us as a business. The next area of this framework is what I call the cultural due diligence. And so, what are the assessment of the values, beliefs, behaviors, and the working environment? Fundamentally, I'll say the organizational identity. Look, if I'm a buyer, I want to know, is it compatible with the entity that I'm interested in, right? If you're being added to an existing entity, how are these two cultures going to come together? Another component of this will be the employee and customer experiences. Richard Branson's got that great expression, right? Take care of your employees because they take care of your customers. You want to know the workforce, the team members are engaged, they're satisfied, there's development opportunities. You want to understand how the customer interactions on the various touch points. You want to look at morale here and the relationship management practices within the business as a whole. And then lastly, they'll also look at, again, I'll say the tech stack. Now, the tech stack can vary based upon the type of business you are, but obviously you've got your fundamental infrastructure. You've got all the things you use day in, day out to run your business on. But if you have additional components, maybe you have some specific IP that you've developed internally. What are the programming languages you've used, or the databases being used, or the development processes being used? That will become an additional component of the due diligence process if you have those elements within the company itself. The next piece of this is what I'll just categorize as sustainability and risk assessment. So they're looking at the evaluation of any environmental impacts, governance structures. They really just want to make sure that you're maintaining compliance within this piece of the overall business. They're going to look at strategic risk. So they'll look forward and do an assessment of the business model, the market position, the competitive environments, industry trends to make sure that strategically they don't see any risks on the horizon. We'll also look at operational risk. So the day-to-day operations, any processes, any resource management, whether it be human or technical, what are any potential operational risks that'll be associated in the business? And then they'll look at financial and legal risks. Again, financial structure, liquidity, regulatory compliance, reputational factors. So you're really fundamentally just looking at risk in evaluating, is there anything in the overall business that I generate a discomfort in the buyer, right? A discomfort. That's what the buyer is going through here. The next section will be valuation and deal structure. So they're going to revalidate the valuation method that was used when they generated the LOI. They're also going to look at financial modeling. And so in the larger transactions, it's completely acceptable for you to have put together a projection for your go forward 12 months, a budget associated with that projection, and they want to evaluate. They're going to basically sanitize it, if you will, and really run through it and make sure that it meets the objectives of the actual return on investment that the buyer is expecting from the deal. As part of this, they will look at the deal structure again and make sure, that it still meets their objectives. And then lastly, they're going to start to look at the purchase agreement and think about some of the legal provisions, because as the buyer gets more informed, that's going to generate additional elements potentially within the legal structure, because they want to allocate risk. They want to establish any obligations that you might have. They're trying to protect ultimately their interest, right, in the acquisition. And lastly is what I refer to as the post-acquisition integration. So they're going to have a framework for combining organizations if you're going to be bolted on or combined with an existing organization, the approach, the timeline, key resources and activities. What are the business objectives with that combination? There'll be I'll say a synergy assessment, helping you as the current owner understand and validate the benefit analysis, right, from the combination. They'll look at revenue enhancements, cost reductions, all those types of things. Then there'll be a day one planning, right? How do we announce the communications, the decisions required for kind of the first day of combined operations to ensure that business continuity? And then change management. What is the approach to equipping and supporting the individual teams through the organizational changes that are going to take place? Because ultimately you're trying to minimize disruption and a go forward success. So at a very high level, this is the, I'll say, framework, if you will, that I've seen in most of my acquisition processes. The due diligence process is incredibly detailed, okay? And this is a very high-level walkthrough of what that looks like. As I mentioned earlier in a couple of my episodes, I built a program around due diligence, and it's spread out over a 90-day period to prepare. And so it's to allow the entrepreneur owner or ownership the opportunity to understand the team members associated with the due diligence process. Because at this moment, you're probably beginning to expose those team members to the very likelihood that you're going to transition the ownership of the business. And it's also an opportunity for you to reinforce what I'll call the people in your care, the opportunity for them to see the go forward moment in the business, in the new ownership, their roles and responsibilities. And candidly, if there are people within that team member group that are not going to go forward, it's also the opportunity for you to show them how you're going to care for them during the process and post-acquisition so that they know they have a soft landing, right? They have a way to transition into their next opportunity as a professional. This due diligence framework, this process that I built, this program that I built, allows the team members to begin to think about the preparation associated with producing the documentation and the relevant, necessary documents. In some cases, I've worked with ownership groups only because they just want to understand the process, formulate it, build a structure that they internally understand, and then at the right time, we can roll that to the employee team member community and introduce them to the structures that are associated. So again, the program is very detailed. It's spread out over a 90-day period because obviously you have a lot going on your plate. You can't dedicate 100% of your time. And so this allows us to meet weekly and be able to help you absorb what is the due diligence process like. And so I hope this was helpful to you. If you send me an email at entrepreneurship@dubos.me, I will send you a template that I use and built to help entrepreneurs understand the due diligence process. I'm also going to give you access to a free mini course. I built a couple of 45-minute videos centered around this framework and beginning to prepare entrepreneurs for the due diligence process. So as part of the framework document that I'll send you, I'll also open up access to the mini course around due diligence for you. So look, I hope you have an awesome day. I'm looking forward to continuing this journey with you, and we'll see you again soon.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Launch Capsule. With your host and mentor to success, James DuBos. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.